Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Oxnard Live. I'm your host, Daniel Chavez Jr. Well, I hope you caught last night's first episode of Oxnard Live in Espanol with my friend as the host, Adam Lopez. It was an amazing interview with the Consul del Moral. So if you have not had an opportunity, please be sure to visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/Oxnard Live to be able to view that video and interview in its full entirety. Or you can visit our website, oxnardlive.net. So tonight, our guest is the newly appointed Oxnard Fire Chief. But a little bit about him, he was actually born and raised in Australia, where he was a volunteer firefighter, came to the States, started his career with the Oxnard Fire Department, and moved his way up through the ranks. Multiple accomplishments. And you know what? I'll just get to the point. Please join me in welcoming Oxnard's Fire Chief, Alexander Hamilton.
Hello, Daniel. Thank you for that introduction.
How you doing, Chief? Thank you for joining me tonight.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So let me ask, and I'm pretty sure you get this a lot. You probably get a lot of references to the Broadway show Hamilton, right?
I do get a lot of references. One of our captains who retired a couple of years ago, but every time he would answer the phone when I was calling, he would say, Alexander Hamilton, the owner of every $10 bill in America. And then obviously the musical came about, which was great because a lot of people didn't realize that Alexander Hamilton wasn't a president. A lot of people had that misconception for a while. So, but I still get the references. It's a pretty famous name now in the US.
So is it safe to say that you're not going to bust out into a song or dance, try to recreate the show right here?
I would love to, but I'm tone deaf and I have no sense of rhythm. My kids, on the other hand, could pretty much do the entire show from start to finish.
Oh,
They know it
wow.
all.
Okay. Well, of course, I always want to respect the arts, but at the same time, I don't think I have the licensing to be able to have any of those songs on the show. So it's good to know. But getting right into it, born and raised in Australia, that's pretty amazing. Is it very similar to what the movie show, kangaroos jumping all over the place and, wide open spaces?
Uh, yes and no. So where I grew up in a big city, so there wasn't a lot of kangaroos bouncing around where I grew up, but certainly there are some wide open spaces. Although interesting, my wife, who grew up in Culver City down in LA, when she first came to the States, for the longest time, the only kangaroos that she saw were ones that had been hit by vehicles on the side of the highway. So it took her a while before she got to see a live kangaroo. So, but yeah, so
Wow.
it is great place to grow up. Although I got to say that I feel very fortunate that I landed here in Southern California and Oxnard specifically.
So, as growing up in Australia, you actually became a volunteer firefighter. What inspired you to get into the profession, to want to be a firefighter? Was it something in your family members that were firefighters, or a firefighter that you came across that just really inspired you?
Um, Honestly, no, it really wasn't any of those things. So if I could tell you briefly a story, I was actually in the process of becoming a chef, a qualified chef, and in Australia, that's a 4-year process. You have to go to school 1 day a week for 3 years, but you have to be working full time in restaurants for the remainder of that time. So I was actually working at a fancy seafood restaurant on a small island just off the coast of Melbourne. And so my interest in the fire service actually came, quite frankly, it sort of came out of boredom. The island that I was working on it was a summertime resort, so it was busy about 2 months out of the year, and then the rest of the time it was relatively quiet. There wasn't much to do other than work and surf. So I decided to volunteer for the local fire brigade is what they call it down there. And so that's what really started my interest in emergency service. So back then I did try and get hired as a firefighter. I also, in Australia, the ambulance service is a third arm of public safety. So it's another government job, just like being in the fire service or the police department. So I tried to get hired with the ambulance service as well, and ultimately I was unsuccessful. But it all worked out for the best in the end.
So, how did you end up making your way this way to the States? What motivated you to leave home? Because for me to even consider leaving the city, I get a little sentimental.
I actually, as a chef, I was working in a variety of different restaurants, and so I was moving around a little bit on the east coast of Australia. Ultimately, and so I would work different jobs for short periods of time in different restaurants. Ultimately, I stumbled upon a job as a tour guide. I went totally left field, different profession altogether. Well, my now wife actually got on my tour bus back in 2000. So I didn't actually ever, honestly, I didn't really consider moving to the US or even visiting the US. It wasn't really on my radar. We met. I stopped being a tour guide. We traveled together for a year and a half. We spent some time apart in obviously, an international relationship, and ultimately settled here in the US in 2002.
And was it right here in SoCal or up north, mid?
So when I first came, I did so 19 years ago, the beginning of 2002, I spent a ski season up in South Lake Tahoe, back when I was young and didn't really have a career, and so I was able to do that. But ultimately, my wife and I settled. We actually lived in Los Angeles prior to getting hired by Oxnard Fire Department. So while in Los Angeles, I was going to school for an associate's degree in fire technology, and sort of starting to work towards becoming a firefighter. I volunteered for the local Red Cross in LA, for the local police department. So I was staying very busy in the process of trying to get hired.
Now, I know that you also have a bachelor's degree in fire protection administration. How was that process, and what exactly does that entail? Because not a lot of people think fire protection administration. What exactly is that?
It is a pretty specialized degree. So it's a lot of just the management of a fire department, but also some of the different functions, some maybe the less glamorous functions of the fire department, and just in terms of the different codes, building and fire codes that we're responsible for, different fire protection activities, fire prevention activities. So it was those kinds of things that degree focuses on. And it was a degree that through Cal State Los Angeles, and they actually have much of it was done via distance learning. So it wasn't actually a virtual course. It was I did actually have to go to school for some of those classes. So I was actually getting my degree after being hired by Oxnard Fire Department.
And you started with the department back in 2005, and then 5 years later, you were promoted to a fire engineer. So tell me the process. How did it feel to don the uniform as an official firefighter, here in the States?
So I have to tell you, and then I'll tell you a little bit more of a story. So when I was a volunteer in Australia, like I said, it was a small island that I volunteered on. Well, I was the youngest volunteer by somewhere between 40 and 50 years. It was mostly older residents of this island, and so which was a great experience for me, because anything that required any kind of physical exertion, they would make me do it. And so it was a lot of fun for a 20-year-old kid. When I came here and when I started work with Oxnard Fire Department, I was blown away at what a difference it was, and the professional nature of the training that we received, and then the work that we do is it was not something I was prepared for, to be honest. It really, you know, I kind of joke with my training captain at the time, who still works with us today, that if I knew what I was getting into at the beginning, I may not have done it. But I survived basic training, and then obviously have thoroughly enjoyed the career. So moved through the ranks and enjoyed every position I've held.
Awesome. So in 2016, you were promoted to battalion chief, and then a year later became the assistant chief.
Mhm.
Now, soon after that, did you know that one day you would become the top person of the fire department?
I guess that's the sort of the logical progression. It wasn't. It was never really an aspiration, which probably sounds odd based on how quickly I've moved through the ranks. But once I became the assistant chief and worked under a retired fire chief base, I realized that there was a very high potential that I could be offered the position. So that's where I really started to do additional work. I got my MBA degree and things like that, because I felt like there is a potential that this would come, this day would come. And to be perfectly honest, I was a little bit surprised. Chief Base, I think originally was going to stay longer, but ultimately his family got a great opportunity that they couldn't pass up. And so when he first talked about retiring, to be honest, I was a little apprehensive about taking the job. I was very nervous. It is a huge responsibility, but I can tell you that in the short time I've been in the position, I'm really enjoying myself. I really like representing this city and protecting these residents.
Awesome. Yeah, I had the privilege of, knowing Chief Base, a great guy,
Yeah.
very soft-spoken. I don't know if there was a different side with all of you guys, but in council chambers, he was always very soft-spoken and always willing to answer my questions, my million questions that I always had. And I also had the privilege few years ago of meeting you and your wife, and at the Kiwanis annual Public Safety Award ceremony, which was actually a great experience because one of the firefighters that you were presenting to, one of the comments that he made stuck with me, was that you support your members, and I believe that's super important, is that a leader is always constantly supporting and motivating those that are under them. Where did you get that type of leadership skills? Of course, everything's developed, but what inspired you to be molded into the leader that you are today?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and so I might need to unpack that a little bit. So in part, I guess I've always leaned towards leadership positions, and in previous positions or previous jobs, and so and then once I got into the fire service, it actually was very similar to working in commercial kitchens, in the sense that we have the similar hierarchical structure where you all report to one boss and that kind of thing. But it was something that it was just a natural fit for me. But I have taken a number of different leadership programs and courses. And I think that's something else that I really appreciate about the fire service, is the learning never stops. There is always new things to learn, new technologies coming out, new ways of doing things. And that's something that I've really enjoyed. But early on in my career, I got involved in the Oxnard Firefighters Association, IFF Local 1684. And so I spent a number of years as essentially second in command of the fire union. And I think that part of that was really formative in my growth as a leader, because there was things that I saw then, in terms of cancer issues with firefighters, behavioral health and substance abuse issues with firefighters that really touched the nerve with me, that I wanted to address. And so I think that's some of those things. I've spent my career trying to do a better job of making sure that our personnel are prepared for the things that happen in this career, and then making sure that they can make it to retirement with their health intact. And so that's something that I've stuck with through the different leadership positions I've had. And now that I'm actually the chief of the department, I still get to support those initiatives, but now my in terms of who I'm taking care of is a lot broader in the sense that I want to make sure that we're making good decisions to obviously protect our residents. And so if I can give our personnel the best tools and equipment and education and training that they need, they can do the best possible job to take care of our residents. And so on some level, maybe it's a fairly simplistic approach, but it's worked well so far in my career.
I honestly have to say was that I was not aware that firefighters were being diagnosed with cancer as a result of their career. It wasn't until a few years ago the fire department had an item on the council agenda in regards to new equipment, and that was one of the topics that ended up coming up. How common is it for firefighters to develop cancer, and what exactly is the contributing factor for them to develop cancer in the first place?
Great question, Daniel. Thank you. And so my interest in this first came when I was a part of the union. I actually went to there's different firefighter memorials every year. So we have a local one here in the county. There's a national one put on by the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters. The National Fire Academy also has a memorial, and then the state up in Sacramento has a memorial. So the first year I went to the state memorial, the 18 of the 21 names that were placed on the wall had died of occupational cancer. And so that was sort of a watershed moment for me. And that's where I realized that we needed to do things differently. Since then, the more I've learned, the more I've researched, the more I've networked across the country, cancer in the fire service is an epidemic. And a lot of people would make the assumption that as firefighters, it must be lung cancer. We breathe that smoke and everything else. And it's actually lung cancer. We are at an increased risk of lung cancer, but it's not that much above the general population. In part because we now wear our self-contained breathing apparatus, so that the mask that we wear when we go into fires has done an enormous amount of work for us. And so one of the other things that they've realized through research over the years is that one of the ways that those toxic chemicals get into our body is through skin absorption. And so I think the initiative that you were talking about in front of council was actually to get new hoods. So the hoods that protect our neck and our head. In the past, those hoods were just a thermal protection, meaning they would just protect us from the heat of the fire. But they've now come up with new technologies that it actually keeps a lot of those toxic particles away from our skin. So one of the things they've figured out is that because as the skin warms up, fighting fire it's a very humid environment. So it's incredibly hot. It's very humid. Our equipment protects us well from the thermal part of the fire, but not necessarily the smoke. And so what we've been finding is the areas of the body that are sort of weak points. So our head and neck with the hood, between our jacket and our pants, where our gloves meet our wrists. So these are all areas where smoke can get in. Up our pant leg is another one because obviously we have pants and boots, and so smoke can get up our legs. But for every 5-degree increase in temperature, there's a 400% increase in how much your skin will absorb. And so that's where we've seen a lot of different brain cancers, head, thyroid, testicular cancer in firefighters. A firefighter is twice as likely to get testicular cancer than the general population. And so there is a whole range of those things. And so some of the steps that we can take to help protect ourselves are really simple. And so we actually have, they're not called baby wipes, but they're essentially baby wipes that after a fire, we wipe all our exposed skin to try and get as much of those toxic chemicals off. Because it's to the fire service, though, we don't call them baby wipes. They're called hero wipes or rescue wipes, or they have some fancy name, but they're baby wipes.
They have to be manly. That's the thing. They have to be tough.
That's right. We're tough firefighters. So, and so some of the other things that we're doing is our firefighters will at the end of the fire we get them to go home or back to the station, excuse me, and have a really hot shower as soon as possible. We make sure that when they're cleaning any of the equipment that was used in a fire, that's done outside and away from the station, because we don't want any cross contamination. So there's little things like that we can do. But now we're starting to look at the new fire engines we purchased, for example, has different storage compartments, so that the things that we wear to a fire don't sit in the cab of the engine where they're sort of off-gassing those chemicals. So there's things like that. The other thing that we're actually looking at with the workers' compensation administrator for the city is how we can better screen. Obviously, or not obviously, but cancer is a presumption for firefighters, meaning that if a firefighter were to get cancer, it's presumed it was caused by the job. So, and that can get very expensive in terms of workers' compensation costs. And so I'm working with the workers' compensation administrator right now to see what we can do in terms of maybe doing a better job of early screenings, because obviously if we can catch cancers earlier, they're much easier to treat, much less expensive to treat, and obviously much more likely that our firefighters will fully recover. We actually we had a pretty nasty fire back in 1998, and it was known as the Technicoloured fire back then. It was just across the way on 3rd Street. It was a fire that took 3 days to bring under control. We're now starting to see that there may be a connection between that fire and some of the cancers that the firefighters who were there on those 3 days are starting to get. So we're actually now looking at sort of studying the different chemicals that were created by that fire, and then which cancers we might want to screen for any of the personnel that were on that fire. So there is a lot more work that we can do, and all of my firefighters know that that if I see them taking unnecessary risks, I'm not going to be happy. And we call it getting called on the carpet, but basically they're going to have to come and explain themselves to me.
Wow. That's a lot of information, and it's information that people don't really recognize unless they actually do the research. So I thank you for sharing that, because it really opens the eyes of everybody as to the risks that are taken by our men and women that are in the fire profession. So thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is Oxnard Live. We're speaking with Oxnard Fire Chief Alexander Hamilton. I want to jump to our comments, because this is also a very interactive show. It is live, it is streamed on Facebook. One comment that we have from Manuel Herrera, is it true that mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is no longer recommended? I hear they only recommend chest compressions.
So that is correct for bystander CPR. So what that means is for my personnel, and if we arrive on scene, we'll be breathing as well as doing chest compressions. But what the latest research shows is that chest compressions are the best chance you can give somebody for survival. And so the reason is that doing chest compressions, it actually takes a little bit of time essentially to build blood pressure. And so anytime you stop doing compressions, the blood pressure dumps, and then it takes time to sort of build it back up again. And so that's where they've realized that particularly if there's only one person doing CPR, is that focusing on the CPR, on the actual chest compressions, is far more important. The other thing to keep in mind is that there will still be oxygen in the blood, even though you're not providing air, for a number of minutes. So I think it's 5 to 7 minutes from memory that there's enough oxygen that you'll be moving around by doing chest compressions. So that's where there's now less emphasis on breathing for somebody. Obviously, for us as first responders, we will be providing respirations as well as chest compressions.
I want to ask you about that because I know a lot of people, they get a little unease when they think about, man, I could potentially one day have to provide CPR. How much pressure do I need to apply to the chest for it to actually be beneficial? And then how fast do I go? Is there any quick, easy techniques that people can relate it to?
There is actually. So in terms of the depth of compressions, you for an adult, you're looking at up to 2 inches, and so it actually is a fairly significant depth. It will feel unusual. The other thing is that when you're doing chest compressions, you'll often feel sort of some cracking, and that occasionally we have broken ribs before while doing chest compressions, but more often than not, it's actually just sort of the cartilage moving between the ribs is what you're feeling. And even if we occasionally break a rib, obviously if we get to bring that person back, they'll probably be okay with a broken rib. They'll forgive us for the broken rib. So and then the other thing, as you mentioned, the other really important factor is the speed. And so what we're looking at is anything above 100 or 110 beats per minute. And so when I was first learning CPR, when I started with Oxnard, they would say, think about that song "Staying Alive." So the beat to that song, the disco version of "Staying Alive," that's about 110 beats a minute. I'm not going to sing it because once again, I'm tone deaf and have no sense of rhythm, but we'll maybe have to look that one up so people can see. But yeah, the correct number would be above 100, somewhere between 100 and 120 chest compressions a minute is what you want to do. And so that's something when we finally do get our arms around COVID, we look forward to doing more of those. We call it hands-only CPR, which is focusing on the chest compressions and not so much on the respirations, because literally you can save a life. Our own research has shown, and just when bystander CPR is initiated before we arrive on scene, the patient has a much better outcome and are much more likely to survive with a better outcome. So it is really important.
Awesome. We also have Georgia Elena Marquez saying, welcome, Chief Hamilton. And then we have Paul from the police department. He actually wanted you to sing Staying Alive. So maybe a show after the show or something.
Yeah. I'll have to give Paul a call after this.
I do want to get into asking about, it's a question that I get asked every time when people, and it's a question that you probably get asked quite a bit also, and it always seems to come up when it's budget time and when people see how much is being invested into public safety. They'll ask the question as to why does the fire engine and the ambulance always go to the same location of an incident, a medical incident, or whatever it may be. Of course, when I get asked that, I always give my response, that it's better to have whoever gets there first start doing what they need to do to try to save the person's life, and then you want the ambulance there to be able to transport. But I want to hear from you. am I giving accurate information or am I giving the wrong
Uh,
information?
No, that you're absolutely giving correct information, and I think that is a big part of the story. So just so the residents understand, so the Oxnard Fire Department currently has 10 response units. So that's 8 engines and 2 ladder trucks located throughout the city, obviously, and then generally on any given day we have between 4 and 5 ambulances here in the city, and I know we can talk more about that in a little bit. So, so those ambulances, once they have a patient in the back and they're driving to the hospital, obviously they can't respond to another emergency, whereas the firefighters can, unless they're riding in the back of the ambulance as well. So part of it is a response time issue, and then obviously if we were to get there first and it's a lower level call. And occasionally the same goes for the ambulance, then we can cancel the other unit and allow them to go available for other calls. And so, but then there is a question of, well, if we know it's a lower level call, why don't you just send the ambulance or just send the engine? And that's a really good question. And to be perfectly honest, everyone in the Oxnard Fire Department swore an oath to protect the residents of this city. And so we want to be able to provide that service to our residents and be there for our residents. And I'm hoping with some of the reforms that we're looking to make when it comes to pre-hospital emergency care and ambulance transport, that we can look at creating a tiered response, meaning that we can sort of try and filter out the calls at dispatch level and change up the amount of resources. We're not in a position to do that yet, but that is one of my goals for the future. And so, but right now the best model that we have is sending at least a fire department resource and a transport resource, and then determining what's going on. Because we'll sometimes get a call and it'll be I can remember a call and it was for difficulty breathing. Now, difficulty breathing call can be any number of things, from a mild asthma attack to potentially an anxiety attack, to something more significant. And maybe they have a history of congestive heart failure or COPD. But I remember we were going on a call of difficulty breathing, and we got to the call and the patient had been shot in the chest, and that's why they were having difficulty breathing. And so you never quite know, what you're going to get until you arrive on scene. A lot of the times the information is accurate, but not always. So that's part of the other reason we want to make sure that we have enough resources on scene. Another example of that would be on traffic collisions. Somebody that's calling 911 probably doesn't know whether or not we need extrication equipment, for example. So, but on every traffic collision call, we'll send the engine and ambulance as we would on any other medical call, but we'll also send the ladder truck, because the ladder truck has the extrication equipment on board. Now we only do extrications between 150 and 200 times a year, but we go on about 1,500 to 1,600 traffic collisions a year. So, the equipment is not always needed, but then if it's not for an extrication, sometimes the ladder truck can show up and help with fluids, to keep the fluids going into the storm drain, to do other things to secure the vehicles, because sometimes vehicles will collide, but the airbags don't deploy. So we'll disconnect the batteries to make sure they don't deploy accidentally and injure somebody. So there's a range of different things, but that's where we try and match the resource to what the incident is.
Wow. A lot to really think about. And then just for our audience, our viewers, is that there is a difference between an engine and a truck. The engine is the smaller one that's, you see traveling around, whereas the ladder truck is the long one where they have a firefighter in the back. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I realized that the firefighter that sits in the back is actually turning those wheels in the back, which I thought was really fascinating. And Can you explain the dynamics as to why that is necessary? Because it's very similar to a semi truck, but they don't have anybody back there turning the wheels.
No, so having that person in the back, and so we call that the tiller box, and so it's the tiller driver that sits in the back. What that does, it has a couple of advantages. Well, first of all, before I talk about the advantages, obviously it takes some pretty good teamwork between the driver and the person that's in that tiller box, because obviously the driver is the driver up front is the one that has the accelerator and the brake and those kinds of things. So ultimately the driver in the front is the one responsible for the operation of the vehicle. So he relies a lot on the person that's in that tiller box in the back. But some of the advantages is that it makes the vehicle much more maneuverable. And so it can actually turn in a smaller circle than the engines can, even though it's significantly longer than the engine. So it provides a lot more maneuverability. The other thing too is that that person in the tiller box is up a lot higher than the people in the cab and the driver in the front. And so because remember that has that big aerial ladder on it, that aerial ladder, that person in the tiller box can have a better idea of where to stop the vehicle to put up the aerial ladder, because they have a much better view of the situation. So because we always want to put the aerial ladder, you want to put it on the corner of the building because that's going to be the strongest point of the building. So we need to be careful of obviously power lines above us and then things on the road. So that's where they really have to work as a team. But it does provide us a lot more maneuverability. But ultimately, the ladder truck, it's really just a giant toolbox. It only carries about 2.5 gallons of water, as opposed to the engines, which carry about 500 gallons of water.
Awesome, thank you. I want to jump into, and you may mention of it, the ambulance. It is something that is now coming out in regards to their contract and the direction that the city is going to go into. Currently, it is the ambulance services through Gold Coast, and I believe AMR is also a provider here in Oxnard. Can you talk a little bit about that and the direction that the city is trying to go into, or the fire department? What's beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give a little bit of background, Oxnard, the city of Oxnard and the fire department has been a part of it's called a joint powers agreement, but essentially all the cities of the county agreed to allow the county to coordinate the ambulance services for the entire county. That agreement has been in place since 1973. There hasn't been a lot of changes since then. They've sort of nibbled around the edges of making some changes and everything else. Gold Coast Ambulance, and we have a fantastic relationship with Gold Coast Ambulance, and so this is certainly not. This is nothing against the current provider, but in 2010, Gold Coast Ambulance was actually bought by AMR, American Medical Response, and what we've seen since then is that the system. It's become sort of a countywide system that's essentially controlled by a single ambulance company, where there used to be more providers. There is another provider, which is Lifeline, but they're primarily in Ojai. Otherwise, the rest of the county now is essentially controlled by AMR. And what we've seen since 2010, but it kind of increased since 2015. We've had these issues with response times. And so, and what we've seen is sort of a degradation in the level of service. And it particularly impacted the South End residents for Oxnard. And so what we were finding increasingly is ambulances that were assigned to the area that covers Oxnard would end up going to cover other areas like Camarillo or Ventura, or they were assigned to non-emergency transport. So it's called an intra-facility transfer, or IFT, where they would take a patient from one hospital to another hospital. And so an ambulance that's normally assigned to 911 emergency response, increasingly the ambulance company has been using those ambulances for those IFTs. And so that that's exacerbated the issue that we've seen with response times, particularly in, like I said, in the south end of town. So one of the things that we started to look at that, we'd been making our concerns known. That's where in 2018, we started our paramedic program, primarily in the south end of Oxnard, to better serve our residents. But even that really didn't solve the problem like we thought it would. Separately, though, is one of the things that we looked at. We did an evaluation of the ambulance transport system in Oxnard, and we found there is significant revenues that we could reinvest into the system to create better service for our residents. So it's not just a matter of ambulance response times, but it's more about making sure that we can get a paramedic on scene in as short a time as possible. Our goal in the next 5 years is to have a paramedic on scene within 5 minutes, whether it's a fire department paramedic or an ambulance paramedic, because the studies show that the patient outcomes increase dramatically. Now we plan on initiating this service, a change in the service on July 1st of this year. We're very excited. We're close to finishing negotiation with a new ambulance provider. And so we're looking forward to, come July 1st, we are going to have more ambulances on the road than we currently do. And I believe the bill for an ambulance ride is likely going to end up being a little bit cheaper. We're just finishing up the fee study, but it looks like we're going to be able to offer that service a little bit cheaper and still be able to have funds to reinvest in the system to create better services for our residents. So we really think it is a win for the city. Other than the seed money to get this program started, it won't cost the city any money out of the general fund or anything like that. But we're excited to initiate this change and then build on that foundation over the next 5 years.
Now, these are going to be fire department paramedic vehicles patrolling and going to these calls, or is it still going to be contracted? How is that working out?
No, so right now we will have a contract with a private provider. So it'll be similar to the current arrangement. The difference is that we will be in charge of managing those units. So in the past, if a unit left Oxnard to go cover Camarillo or Ventura, we had no control over that. If a unit were like I mentioned, those IFTs, and they would go into an IFT, we had no control over that. And so the difference now is it'll still be a private provider, but those units will be dedicated to 911 response. None of those units will be doing IFT responses. We'll obviously still, as we do right now with fire protection services, we'll still help our outside jurisdictions and other cities in the county. The city of Port Hueneme is a great example. Right now, they have one fire station in Port Hueneme with a single engine that's run by Ventura County Fire Department. Anytime there is a structure fire in the city of Port Hueneme, we will generally respond, in addition to their engine, we will respond 3 of our own engines, a ladder truck, and a battalion chief to help them out. And so we see the ambulance services as functioning the same way. So we will still help our neighboring jurisdictions as we do right now with fire service. The difference is, though, that we'll have more control over the system so that we can better serve our residents.
Awesome. I think that's amazing. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, speaking with Oxnard Fire Chief Alexander Hamilton. I now want to get into the phase of what does the Oxnard Fire Department look like under Chief Hamilton? I know there was an article recently in the VC Star during your swearing in ceremony, you touch on it. But for those that weren't able to read it or able to see your swearing in ceremony, what does the Oxnard Fire Department look under your leadership?
Great question. I feel very fortunate to be coming into this position when I do. With the advent of Measure E, I think we can make some really smart investments in the fire department to prepare ourselves for the future. You know, if you compare Oxnard Fire Department with similar sized cities in California, we are the lowest funded and lowest staffed. And we've always taken that as a badge of honor, and all of our personnel know from early in their careers that we do more with less here at Oxnard Fire Department. We love being able to protect our residents. So part of it is making new investments, improving our infrastructure. A lot of our fire stations are very old and dated, but more than that is that we really need to reconnect with our community. And what I mean by that is that we want to hire more Oxnard residents. So one of the issues, we've never really made a concerted effort on this. And so we definitely want to hire more women. We need more female firefighters, but we want to hire more people that grew up here in Oxnard. And so just to give you a little bit of an example is a number of years ago, actually when I first made battalion chief, we set up a internship program with Oxnard College fire technology programs, so that any student that was in a fire technology class could come and do an internship for us, and then they would get preference points if they applied for a job with us. Originally, when we set up that internship program, it was only going to be available to Oxnard High School graduates, until we discovered that at the time there wasn't a single Oxnard High School graduate in a fire technology program at Oxnard College. And so that led me to understand that we haven't done a good enough job in letting our residents know that a career in the fire service is a fantastic career. It is, there are some hard days, there is some hard work, but it's an incredibly rewarding career. You get to save lives for a living. You get to, and the fact that it's somebody that grew up in the community they end up serving. And I know there's a healthy dose of irony because I grew up in Australia, but I think there can be no greater honor than serving your own community. And so that's what I want to really focus on is hiring more of our local talent, because we have a tremendous amount of local talent. So it's going to take some time, you know, and we need to spend some more time investing in the high schools. And sort of getting the word out, encouraging high school grads to move into the Oxnard College programs. I'm hoping that through the ambulance, the program, the changes we're making with ambulance transport, that may be another opportunity for people to be interested in a career in the fire service. If there's a potential for lifeguards, you know, in the future, that would be another opportunity for our local residents to get involved and ultimately become Oxnard firefighters. So that's something that I'm really excited to pursue, because I think, you know, it's one of the things that when I first got hired, you know, you get hired in the fire department, that's where you stayed for your 30-year career. And so I guess I'm kind of old school like that. Oxnard stuck with me as long as I'm allowed to work here. But increasingly, we have people that, you know, if they grew up in different areas, that they would work here for a number of years and they'd go back to the areas from where they grew up. And that's been something of a recurring theme for us. So that's another reason why I really want to hire a local talent, because they're going to want to stay here. And raise a family here, and I think that's really important.
That is amazing. I think that's admirable, and I appreciate the fire department taking those steps, because we saw Oxnard PD take those steps a few years back, and it's a sense of pride for the community, and I think that's important. I also want to mention that Armando Delgado, who is part of the Carpenters Local 805, he says, welcome aboard, Chief Hamilton. Feel free to reach out to us for any volunteer help. So once COVID dies down a little bit more, you got a good workforce of volunteers right there for you.
Fantastic. Well, if I could just jump in right there, we recently applied for a grant for doing another smoke detector installation program. And if we're successful in that grant, I'm gonna take all the volunteer help I can get, because we're gonna have 5,000 smoke detectors to install for our residents.
Now, I want to make a comment about that because um, some people believe it, some people don't. Is it a law or a requirement that there has to be a smoke alarm in every bedroom or every room, or how is it phrased?
Uh, you're putting me on the spot here. I know it's absolutely a recommendation to put a smoke detector in every bedroom,
Okay.
and then in the living areas.
Okay.
I would have to defer to my fire marshal as to whether it's law. I know for for rentals, it absolutely a law that requires working smoke detectors in those rentals, and that's the responsibility of the landlord. But for people that own their own homes, I'm not sure that it's a law as much as a very strong recommendation. So, and
Okay.
just, I believe it was last weekend or possibly 2 weekends ago, there was an elderly resident in the Imperial Mobile Home Park, and I think it's safe to say that his life was probably saved by having a smoke alarm. And so he was able to be alerted to the fire before it got too big. And we arrived on scene quickly. We were able to help him evacuate from the residence and then go after the fire. So they are a lifesaver. And so I look forward to being able to install a lot more of them if we're successful in this grant.
Of course, I only make that comment just because our neighborhood chair for the neighborhood that I live in, he was like hounding us. He's like, put a smoke alarm in every room, every place that there's people. And I did that to my home, and of course my family, they're looking at me weird, like, why are you putting all of these things up? I'm like, I don't know. I was told to do it. I'm doing it. It's for your safety. Enjoy it. Just so okay. So
Yeah,
that
and
that.
it's one of those things, and particularly if you close bedroom doors at night, which isn't a bad idea, because it'll if the fire's on the outside of the room, obviously it'll protect you for a significant amount of time before the smoke starts coming in. But that's if you do that, that's why you also want a smoke detector, obviously, in your bedroom, so that you're alerted very early if there was an electrical short or hopefully not an unattended candle, but things like that do happen. And so that's where it is highly recommended to have a smoke detector in every bedroom.
Thank you, Chief, very much for joining us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Oxnard Fire Chief Alexander Hamilton. Um, you can learn more about the fire department by visiting the city's website, oxnard.org, and selecting the fire department's tab. Um, you know, there's also a great program, and I'm almost positive it's not occurring now. It's the CERT program, which actually provides some training. I believe it's a couple of hours of volunteer time that they do, and they get sort of a little certificate of completion, which I have not had the opportunity, but hopefully when COVID dies down, that program will come back, and our residents can participate in that again.
Yeah, so that program, it's a few hours, one day a week for 6 or 7 weeks, and it really just makes sure that you're well prepared in the case of a major disaster. And then obviously you can help us in the event of a major disaster. And so we're looking at how different technologies that we're going to be able to use for people that have gone through the CERT program, where potentially they could send us photos in the neighborhood after an earthquake or something like that. But obviously with COVID going on, we haven't been able to run any of those classes. One of the things, though, that I would encourage, and you can do this through your neighborhood chairs, is get involved in the Ready and Resilient program. And so that we have been able to maintain, at least virtually, but there's lots of little tips and tricks and things that you can learn about how you can prepare yourself and your family in the event of a major disaster. So that is something that I can encourage people to do. If you sign up for BC Alert, that way you can get emergency notifications if they come out and that kind of thing. So thank you for allowing me the little plug on the Ready and Resilient program.
Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, again, Oxnard Fire Chief Alexander Hamilton, please be sure to join us next week as we introduce a new segment that I'm calling The Viewpoint. 3 topics, 2 viewpoints, 1 very interesting conversation. We're going to be having former homeless commissioner Lucy Cartagena and the creator of Citizens for a Better Oxnard, Manuel Herrera. Both of them are going to join me. We're going to be discussing 3 topics dealing with Oxnard, and you definitely aren't going to want to miss this. This is Oxnard Live. I'm your host, Daniel Chavez Jr., all live and 100% real. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Bye.